for more on what's happening on the ground. I'm joined now by our defence and security analyst, Michael Clarke. Hello again to you, Michael. Let's start with Kherson. Reports of a lot of shelling there. What is going on there?
Yes, I mean, the Russians are on the east bank of the Dnieper River, and we always knew that sooner or later they would start to shell Kherson. The city is more or less depopulated now, and there's an artillery battle going on either side of the river. The Ukrainians are trying to shell Russian artillery positions, and their technology for doing that, their counter-battery radars and their more accurate guns, are fairly successful at doing that. But the Russians have just got more artillery. They can always bring more artillery in. So Kherson will not be safe until either the Ukrainians can suppress Russian artillery or make the Russians pull back about 30 kilometres out of artillery range. But to do that, of course, they'd have to surround them on the other side of the river. They may do that, but that's a big ask.
OK. Donbas, also some fierce fighting up there.
Yeah,
What's going to happen there? Because a lot of people say, oh, it's coming to winter, everything's going to wind down. Do you think that's the case?
No, I don't think it will. Things change during the winter. I think the Ukrainians will be anxious to keep the pressure on. But at the moment, there is a ferocious battle going all across the line of conflict, of forward lines in the Donbas, and particularly between Svatove and Kreminna. And that's the main P66, main motorway that comes from Russia all the way down north to south. And it's a main artery for supplies. If the Russians lose that, and it's already cut between Svatove and Kreminna, then they've got to go a long way round towards Starobilsk, which is about 35 miles further east, because there aren't that many roads in that area that can take military traffic. And the fighting there is ferocious. And the Russians have put their airborne troops that they got out of Kherson, the good troops, they've sent them to Svatove, and they're really digging in. We thought that this battle might be over a couple of weeks ago, but no, the Russians are making quite a stand at Svatove and at Kreminna, and the Ukrainians are pushing very, very hard. But it's ferocious. These are the most intensive battles, open battles, that I think I've seen since the war began.
How many people are they losing each day on both sides? I remember Ukraine at one point were losing about 200 men a day.
Yeah.
What's the situation there? Do we know?
Some report it's much more than that. They're losing 700 or 800 a day, and the Ukrainians are losing, a fair number of troops as well, fewer than that. But the Russians are just throwing men into these almost human wave attacks. They've got, criminals in the front, people that they've brought out of the convicts that they brought out of prisons, then mobilised troops behind them, and then regular troops behind them. And the regular troops are called barrier troops, and their job is to fire on anybody who retreats. So the idea is you go forward or you die. And this is causing them huge losses, and they can't sustain those losses, even if they don't value these troops, which they don't seem to. They can't sustain losses of that order for too much longer.
It's so horrific, it almost seems beyond comprehension.
It does. We've seen it in other parts of the world, in other times of history. We never thought we'd see it in Europe in the 21st century.
OK, and this Zaporizhzhia that's jumping out at me at the moment, we've heard so much about Zaporizhzhia and the nuclear power plant there. There are a number of these nuclear power plants across the country. They continue to get attacked. Do you think that they're just going to carry on operating, or what will happen there?
Yes, I think they will carry on. I mean, the nuclear power plants are in some danger because, not of direct shelling, but because the electricity grid is being taken down systematically by Russian attacks. And the electricity grid is fundamental to the nuclear power plants. And the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency yesterday, Rafael Grossi, he warned very clearly. He said, look, there are 4 big power plants, nuclear power plants in Russia. So there's Zaporizhzhia, there's Rivne, there's Khelnitsky, and there's Pivdenovsk. It's usually called the South Ukraine one for obvious reasons.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to say.
But those 4, in the last few days, have gone off the main electricity grid, and they're only being served by generators and exterior power. And so what he's saying, you can't carry on like this, because sooner or later there will be a nuclear disaster. If one of those stations loses all power for several hours, there will be a nuclear accident. And he's calling on the international community to take that very seriously and do something about that.
OK, just finally, just talk to us about General Surovikin. He's the general who's in charge of this offensive now, isn't he, across the country? He's
the man who's behind all of this. I mean, it is his strategy. Our Ministry of Defence describe him as brutal and corrupt. Those are the words they use for him. And he's got a very checkered history of borderline, criminality. He's accused of many crimes, including shooting Russians, shooting Russian soldiers, selling arms, and he gets away with all of them, or he's just regarded as a disciplinary problem, not a criminal problem. But he is very clever. And what we see in Ukraine now is the most coherent strategy they've had. And so he said, look, I'm not, and this is one of the statements he is believed to have made, he said, I'm not going to waste Russian troops' lives chasing fanatics who are armed by NATO around a guerrilla warfare. He said, we have technical means of making Ukraine surrender. And his technical means are to reduce the vulnerability of his own troops, to get them involved in battles that he thinks they can win, and then to put real pressure on civilian society, which is what all these attacks on the electricity grid are doing. It's what he's done in other places, in Syria, in Chechnya, in the Tajik civil war, in Afghanistan. He's a very experienced officer, but all of his experiences are from ruthless civilian-based offensives, and that's what he does.